The first person who showed up at my door wasn't someone I called. It wasn't my roommate from college, who lives 40 minutes away and always says we should hang out more. It wasn't my older sister, who texted me a heart emoji when I told her and then went quiet. It wasn't even my best friend Derek, who I've known since we were 12 years old, and who had said the week before, "Anything you need, man, just say the word." No. The first person who knocked on my apartment door 2 hours after I got home from the emergency room with a broken leg, 3 cracked ribs, and a concussion that made the ceiling tilt sideways was Vanessa Park. And of all the people it could have been, Vanessa was the last one I expected. We worked at the same architecture firm in downtown Chicago. Different teams, same floor, same kitchen, with the broken Keurig that everyone complained about and nobody fixed. I was a project designer. She was a structural engineer. We had been professionally annoying each other for almost 2 years. It started over a parking garage. Not the most romantic origin story, I know. But she had flagged one of my design submissions during a cross-team review, said the load distribution on the east wall was going to be a problem down the line. I thought she was being overcautious. She thought I was being arrogant. We had a 20-minute argument in the conference room on the 14th floor while our coworkers pretended to look at their laptops. I won the argument on paper. She was right in practice. 2 months later, the client came back with exactly the structural concerns she had flagged, and I had to spend a weekend revising everything. I never actually told her she'd been right. I just started paying more attention when she talked in meetings, which I think annoyed her even more than the argument had. After that, we developed a kind of uneasy rhythm. We didn't avoid each other, but we didn't exactly seek each other out either. We argued in meetings. We disagreed on load paths and cantilever tolerances, and whether the firm's new open plan layout was a productivity enhancement or a slow psychological experiment. She had strong opinions about everything and zero patience for being handled. I had strong opinions about everything and a tendency to dig in when I should probably let things go. Together, we were a recurring headache for our project manager. But somewhere in between all of it, we started talking. Not about work. Just talking. She'd be in the kitchen waiting for the Keurig to decide whether it wanted to function, and I'd come in and make a comment about something completely unrelated, and she'd come back with something sharp and funny, and 20 minutes would pass without either of us noticing. We never called it anything. We never made plans. It was just the kitchen and the broken Keurig, and the fact that she was always the most interesting person in whatever room she was standing in. I didn't let myself think too much about that. The accident happened on a Thursday night in February. I was biking home from the office. I know, February in Chicago, but I had been doing it for 3 years without incident when a delivery truck ran a red light on Dearborn and clipped me going about 30. I went over the handlebars, hit the curb, and woke up in the ambulance with a paramedic asking me what day it was and me not entirely sure. The ER took about 4 hours. Broken tibia, 3 cracked ribs on my left side, and a concussion that the doctor described as moderate, which I later learned meant serious enough that we're not letting you drive for 2 weeks. They gave me a walking boot, a prescription for something that made me feel like I was standing in a swimming pool, and a printed sheet of instructions for concussion recovery that I could not fully read because the words kept sliding. My sister offered to fly in from Phoenix. I told her I was fine. Derek texted that he could come by this weekend. Not tonight this weekend. My parents are retired, living in Florida, and my mom cried on the phone for 10 minutes and then asked if I needed her to send soup in a cooler, which is not how soup transport works, but I didn't say that. I got home in an Uber, made it up the 3 flights to my apartment because the elevator in my building has been under repair since November, lay down on my couch, and stared at the ceiling while the pain medication tried to convince me none of this was happening. Then someone knocked. I didn't answer the first time because getting up felt like a project I needed to schedule in advance. The second knock was harder. I got to the door in about twice the time it should have taken, pulled it open, and there was Vanessa. She was still in her work clothes. Charcoal blazer. The dark jeans she wore on Fridays, even though it wasn't Friday. And she was holding a paper bag from the Thai place on Erie that I sometimes mentioned in the kitchen. Her hair was wet from the sleet outside. She was looking at me with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Not pity. Something more careful than that. You live on the third floor, she said, with a broken leg and a busted elevator. I'm aware. She looked past me into the apartment, then back at me. Is anyone here? The question landed somewhere uncomfortable. No. Her jaw did a thing. Okay. She stepped in without being invited, set the bag on my counter, and turned around. Sit down before you fall down. I sat down. I still don't fully know why Vanessa came that night. We weren't close. We weren't even friends in the conventional sense. I had her number because of a project 2 years ago, and I don't think either of us had ever used it. But apparently she had heard about the accident from someone at the office. I think it was our project manager, Marcus, who knew because I had emailed to say I'd be out, and she had just shown up. She unpacked the Thai food without asking what I wanted. She'd gotten pad see ew, which happened to be the thing I always ordered from that place, and I wasn't sure if she knew that or guessed or just picked something filling. She handed me a container and chopsticks and sat in the chair across from me and said, in the most matter-of-fact voice possible, you should not be alone with a concussion tonight. I've had worse nights alone. That's not the reassurance you think it is. I looked at her. She was eating her own food and not making it a thing, which somehow made it harder to argue with. Vanessa, why are you here? She looked up. Because someone needed to be. That was it. No big speech, no explanation of what we were or weren't to each other. Just, someone needed to be, so she was. I didn't know what to do with that. I'm not sure I still fully do. She stayed for 3 hours that first night, until she was satisfied that I could navigate to the bathroom and back without issue, and that the concussion wasn't doing anything alarming. She set up the prescription bottles on the counter with a sticky note that said what time to take each one, which I found mildly embarrassing and also genuinely useful because the medication was making time feel approximate. Before she left, she said, "Don't be an idiot tomorrow," which from Vanessa I understood to mean take care of yourself. I told myself that was that, a one-time thing, an unusually decent gesture from a coworker I happened to argue with a lot. She came back the next morning with coffee. I opened the door and she was standing there with 2 cups from the place on the corner and a paper bag that turned out to have an egg sandwich in it. She looked at me the way she always looked at things she was assessing, quickly, thoroughly, like she was running calculations. You look terrible, she said. Good morning to you too. That was good morning. Did you sleep? Some. Did you take the 8 a.m. pill? I had forgotten the 8 a.m. pill, she could tell. She stepped past me, checked the counter, handed it to me with a glass of water, and then sat down and opened her own coffee. Like this was completely normal. It wasn't normal. But I didn't know how to say that without making it weird. And she didn't give me much of an opening anyway. She had brought her laptop and was going to work remotely for the morning. She said, in case I needed anything. I told her that was unnecessary. She nodded like she'd heard me and then opened her laptop. I want to be honest about something. Part of me wanted her to leave, not because I didn't want her there, but because I did, in a way that felt disproportionate and confusing and inconveniently timed, given that I could not walk without a boot and my head hurt when I looked at screens. It was easier to be annoyed at her in meetings. It was easier to be the guy who didn't back down when she flagged his drawings. This version, her sitting on my couch with coffee, actually present in a way that most people in my life had managed to avoid. I didn't have a defense for it. The recovery was longer than I wanted it to be. The ribs were the worst of it actually, more than the leg. Breathing hurt. Laughing hurt. Sneezing was genuinely alarming. I was out of the office for 2.5 weeks, and the concussion meant I couldn't look at screens for longer than an hour at a time, which effectively took away the 2 things I do to avoid being alone with my thoughts: work and my phone. Vanessa came every day for the first week. Not all day. She had her own job, her own life, her own projects that I knew were complicated because I had heard her on calls. But she came in the morning, sometimes at lunch, always checked in by text in the evening. She brought food from different places, rotated so I wouldn't get tired of any one thing. She brought a couple of library books she thought I might like, which was a bold choice because she was selecting them blind. And one of them was genuinely great. And the other was aggressively not for me, which she found funnier than I did. On day 4, she came in at noon and found me trying to put on my own shoe, the regular one, not the boot, which required bending in a way that my ribs were not on board with. I had been at it for about 6 minutes and was approximately nowhere. "What are you doing?" she said. "Not a question. Going for a walk. You can't bend to tie that. I'm figuring it out." She set down the bag she was carrying, came over, and crouched in front of me and tied my shoe. She didn't make a big thing of it. She just did it, stood up, and said, "Where do you want to walk?" I looked at her. "You have to move around," she said. "Staying on that couch is going to make the ribs worse, not better. So where are we going?" We walked around the block. One block, slow, with me in the boot, and her matching my pace without comment. It took about 15 minutes because I had to stop twice. She talked about something going wrong on a project at work. A foundation issue in an office building they were redesigning on the north side. And I found myself asking questions without thinking. Because the problem was actually interesting, and for about 10 minutes I forgot that I was moving at the pace of a man twice my age. That was the thing about Vanessa. She never made the recovery the whole story. She didn't come over and sit with me and make me feel like a patient. She just kept treating me like a person, which sounds basic but turned out to be harder to find than I expected. On day 9, I did something I'm not proud of. She had been helping me reorganize some files on my laptop. I needed to send updated drawings to a client and couldn't do it easily one-handed. And she noticed that I had a folder labeled with a project name she recognized. One she had flagged 18 months ago. The parking garage. She didn't say anything, but she saw it. And I, because I was tired and my ribs hurt, and being taken care of by someone I had a complicated and unacknowledged thing for, was making me feel raw in a way I didn't know how to manage, said something short and dismissive about how she didn't need to dig through my files. The words came out harder than I meant them. Vanessa went still. She looked at the screen for a second, then closed the laptop gently and stood up. "Okay," she said. She started gathering her things. "I didn't mean it like that," I said. She stopped, didn't turn around. "Then how did you mean it?" I didn't have a good answer. I stared at the boot on my foot. "I don't know. I'm sorry." She turned around then. She was looking at me the way she looked at structural problems, identifying the failure point. "You know what I've figured out about you?" she said. "I have a feeling you're going to tell me. When you feel like you don't have control of something, you push. You pushed back on that parking garage because you didn't want to be wrong. You're pushing right now because you don't like needing help." She paused. "That's fine. I get it. But don't aim it at me when I'm the one who keeps showing up." There was a silence, a long one. "You're right," I said. She raised an eyebrow slightly. "I know, that was a terrible moment to be gracious about it." Something in her face shifted. Not a full smile, but close. She sat back down. We didn't talk about it again that night. But something about the air in the room felt different after, like a window had been opened. About a week later, I was cleared to go back to the office part-time. 2 days a week to start, light duty, no all-nighters. I went in on a Tuesday and it felt strange. The floor was the same. The broken Keurig was the same. My desk was piled with things I'd have to sort through. But everything felt slightly shifted, the way things do when you've been away long enough to see them fresh. Vanessa was in a meeting when I got in. She didn't see me arrive. I sat down and started through the stack on my desk, and about 40 minutes later she walked past and stopped. "You're back," she said. "Part-time." She nodded. Looked at me for a second. "How are the ribs?" 80%. "Leg?" "Getting there." She nodded again and kept walking. Totally normal. Professional. Like the past 2.5 weeks hadn't happened. Except that at noon, she appeared at my desk with a coffee from the corner place and set it down without a word and walked away before I could say anything, and that was not nothing. I caught up with her in the kitchen that afternoon. "Hey," I said. She looked up from the Keurig, which was being uncooperative as usual. I'd had a version of this conversation in my head for a few days and I still didn't love how it started. "I want to say something and I need you to not make it weird." "Already concerned," she said. "When I was at home, those 2 weeks, that mattered to me, more than I said." She looked at me for a second, not moving. "Okay, I'm bad at saying that kind of thing in real time. I always figure, I'll get to it later. You're in an accident in February in Chicago," she said. "There's going to be a later." "I know. I just mean, I noticed that you kept coming. I noticed every day." Vanessa looked at the Keurig. The machine made a sound like it was considering its options. "I wasn't keeping score," she said. "I know you weren't. That's sort of the point." She looked at me then. What is the point exactly? I'd been asking myself the same thing. The honest answer was that I wasn't sure where any of this was going, and my instinct was to be careful about saying things I couldn't take back. And at the same time, I had just spent 2.5 weeks being reminded that careful and cautious are not the same thing as safe. I think you're the most interesting person I've ever argued with, I said, and I think I want to stop pretending that's a small thing. The kitchen was quiet for a second. The Keurig finally produced something. That might be the least romantic thing anyone has ever said to me, Vanessa said. Is it working? She picked up her coffee, looked at me. I haven't decided yet. She walked out of the kitchen. I stood there for a moment, not entirely sure where that had landed. That evening, she texted me, the foundation issue on the North Side project is fixed for the record. I was right about the load path. And then, after a pause, you can take me to dinner sometime and tell me I was right in person. I stared at my phone for probably 15 seconds. I wrote back, Friday? She wrote back, Friday. It wasn't a big speech. It wasn't a dramatic declaration in a hospital hallway. It was Vanessa, being exactly who she always was, direct and unsentimental, and somehow, underneath all of it, the person who had shown up every single day when she had every reason not to. Dinner on Friday turned into dinner most Fridays after that. The arguments didn't stop. They never did. And I don't think either of us would know what to do with a conversation that didn't push back somewhere. But they changed shape. There was something underneath them now that made them feel like something we were doing together instead of against each other. 6 months later, I was back on my bike. Different route, different time of day, full awareness that February in Chicago will never actually be safe. But I was back. One morning, I came into the office, and Vanessa was already at her desk, and she looked up when I walked in and said, "You're on the bike again. How did you know? You have helmet hair, and you look annoyingly pleased with yourself." I sat down at my desk and thought about the Thursday in February, when I had come home to an empty apartment and a ceiling that tilted and no idea who was going to show up. And then I thought about a knock on the door, and sleet on a blazer, and pad seat you from the place on Erie, and the way someone can become essential to your life in increments so small that you don't see it happening until you're already there. I didn't tell her any of that right then. I just said, "You want coffee?" And she said, "Obviously," and I went to the kitchen and dealt with the Keurig, and that was enough. If you'd been in my position, stuck on a couch, broken and stubborn, and not very good at asking for help, and someone kept showing up anyway, every single day, what would you have done? Tell me in the comments below. And if this story meant something to you, leave a like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.